Have you ever heard people say to you, I just expect them to walk through the door. I just keep expecting to see them. You know what they're doing? They're talking about their brain map. Their brain says that's what should be happening because that's the way life has worked for you. Not just space, where, not just time, when, but it's the close piece, the relationship piece, that really adds the big piece of this here. So when it doesn't happen, our brain alerts us. And the longer that gets, then the brain can set up all kinds of really alarm systems. And we call them grief and mourning. And so we have emotional reactions when a person is never coming back. We know that on one level, but it takes a long time to remap the brain, believe me. We're talking years, which is why people get upset when they think 6 months down the road after someone they love died, I should be okay. Why am I still having this experience? Well, what happens if there's a special day in your relationship? Let's say it's your spouse that died, and you two had a very special, in the fall, every fall you used to go when the leaves were turned and you used to go on a little trip to see the leaves. It was just one of those beautiful little things you did. Nobody knew about it, just the two of you. Let's say your partner died in the winter, and you're working with grief and you did it and you're getting things through and you think you're okay, and you come to September and you're not thinking about it, and then you get to October and the leaves change, and all of a sudden your brain map says, hey, this time of the year we used to do this. And all of a sudden you have this moment where you just start to cry, you get emotional, your grief, sadness hits you. And people are saying, what's wrong with you? I thought you'd been doing pretty good. And all of a sudden now, well, you've never met that in your brain until that event was meant to be. And that's the time piece that kicked in, the now. So people struggle with this because they think that, it's just a matter of dealing with the truth that the one I love has died and they're never coming back. But the brain map has a different piece to it. And it keeps reminding us and reminding us. Well, what happens when the person doesn't die, but they're not coming back the way they were? And that's what I mean about life then and life now. This person you love, this person you have all kinds of memory, all kinds of experiences, you've shared your very life with. The brain has that map. But all of a sudden, that person isn't there. Oh, they're there physically. But the brain map is having a problem with this. And it keeps sending up signals like something's wrong here. This isn't right. And so we keep trying to correct it and try to make it like it was, right? Oh, Dad, you remember I told you that? You've forgotten, but I told you that. What are we doing? We're trying to get back to the way it was. Oh, no, you know that's not true. We worked on that. You remember that? Those are all ways in which we try to keep it the way it was, because the brain map is saying, that's the way I knew life to be. But you and I know that doesn't work. You and I know that when we try to correct them, that it gets frustration. When we try to remind them of who we are, and they kind of come to it and we think, okay, and then 5 minutes later they're asking again, we find ourselves getting a little bit emotional, angry perhaps, frustrated. That's because the brain map is trying to get us to live life like it was when we can't do that, because that's not life the way it was. But that's not easy for us. I've been where you are. I know it's not easy to make that transition. And it takes a long time. So let me move to the next piece very quickly. And I want to talk about this grief piece, because I think it will help us in terms of where we go, in terms of life then and life now. So if I talk about ambiguous loss, what I'm referring to is that there are two types of losses, and I use that term loss not like lost. They're not lost like you can find them. These are losses that we experience that are taken from us. They're gone. They're not there any longer. And when we talk about ambiguous loss, there are two types of losses that we understand contribute to this. The first type of loss is when a person is physically absent, but psychologically present. So for instance, in many of my situations in my grief work where the body has not been recovered, where there's been a murder and they can't find the body, or the person is lost at sea or in war or somewhere where they cannot find the body, you live with this ambiguous grief. You live with the fact that they are not here physically, I can't find them, but they're here psychologically. They're in my heart. And you hear people say, I'll never believe they're dead until I see that, right? That's how we respond to it. Because we need to know that even although we have all the proof in the world that there's no way they can still be alive, until we know for sure, we live in this ambiguity, this ambiguous loss where the person is not there, but they're in my heart. Now, it doesn't just have to be death. So a lot of patients or clients that I worked with, for instance, had children who were in the opioids dilemma and were on the streets and had disappeared. They didn't know where they were. I have a good friend whose son, who's the same age as one of my boys, he's 38. They have not had contact for 10 years. He's somewhere out west in a major city, and they have no idea if he's alive or dead. They're living with an absence of physical, but the presence of psychological. They every day they think about him, as we all would. Every day they hope they could hear from him. So living with this sense of people not being physically present, but we carry them in our heart, we're experiencing this unique type of loss called ambiguous loss. But the other way to do it is when people are psychologically absent, but physically present. So here's where we talk about dementia and Alzheimer's, where people who are physically present with us, but they're psychologically not. That's not who they were in life as it was. They don't think the same. They don't talk and react the same ways. They aren't able to process us or our experiences. And so many times people say to me, I feel like I've lost the person who I knew. I mean, that's a common description of Alzheimer's dementia. I've lost the person who was there. But they're still here. They're physically there. But how we know them is different. And that's the other side of ambiguous loss. So ambiguous loss refers to both those types of experiences. One where the body is physically absent, but the person is psychologically present in you every day. And the other where they are physically present, but they are psychologically absent. We cannot make that connection with them the way we used to make that connection with them. Just simple, this is just, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time, but you see the ways in which these happen, the ideas of natural disasters and missing persons, what's going on in Israel right now, where all the captives, where people are living here in Canada and elsewhere in the world, not knowing if their loved one is alive or dead. They're struggling with this ambiguous loss. The other side of it, obviously Alzheimer's, dementia, but people who have experienced a traumatic brain injury is another category because life is different for them. They do not act the same. They are quite different. Post-traumatic stress, where people behave so differently than the way they behaved before. These are all ways in which we can experience this ambiguous loss. So what I want to say to you is that when we're living with somebody who is physically present, but psychologically not who they were, let's name it. You have ambiguous loss. That's grief. And guess what? That's normal. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not pathological. It's the normal response that we should have when we live this experience. So sometimes we wonder if we're going crazy. Am I the only person that feels this? I know I shouldn't get frustrated, but I get frustrated. I know I'm supposed to react calmly, but I get angry. I just don't get it. Perfectly normal. Now, it doesn't feel good, and that doesn't have to mean we like it, but I want you to hear that there's nothing wrong with you. This is normal. It's grief. It's ambiguous loss. If you want to name it, because that's exactly what it is you're experiencing. So the way in which I work with people in ambiguous loss is also, interestingly enough, the way that we need to remap the brain. So let's look at that for a few minutes. And the goal, by the way, the goal of working with people in ambiguous loss is not to change the problem. I can't fix dementia. I can't cure Alzheimer's. I can't do that. The only hope we have in working with ambiguous loss is to give ourselves what we need to face what we're experiencing. That's why I said this is about you tonight. What is it that you need to do, not to change the person? I can't do that. I wish we could. But what is it that we can do for ourselves that will allow us to live with both the ambiguous loss and to remap the brain into understanding how we find life now, not just how life was then?